Hi, my name's JP Kuhlwein, and I welcome you to this new episode of the Off the Shelf podcast, brought to you by the Conference Board. And today I'm happy to have Joseph Jaffe here, Provocateur-in-Chief or Admiral. We'll go to that, and we'll talk about his new book, which is Built to Suck: The Inevitable Demise of the Corporation and How to Save It. Joseph, thanks a lot for being here.
It's great to be here.
I should say Admiral Joseph. Who is Joseph Jaffe? Joseph is a thought leader, speaker, author, consultant, particularly in the areas of innovation, marketing, new media. And as I said, he's an admiral. He likes to play the role of, I would say, agent provocateur. I hope I pronounced that right.
Gesundheit.
Yes, in the industry, in the marketing, CPG industry in particular. In his writing, on-stage performances. I think our CMO at the Conference Board was inspired by a recent talk at the ANA Masters of Marketing Convention, where you basically told big CPG advertisers in their face that they were built to suck, to kind of summarize that. But to be fair, Joseph follows up his provocations with some consulting and helping them change that. In that respect, he is a serial entrepreneur as well, I would say. You've founded, I think, your third consultancy called the HMS Beagle, and we'll know in a second why that is. You're from South Africa, which will make this conversation even more interesting. And you now live with your wife and two sons in Connecticut. I won't say the address, I think, on public.
It's probably
public podcast.
And it's probably easy to find because, you know, a lot of my information should be readily available, you know, online these days anyway, in terms of more transparent. And
it's the surveillance economy.
Right, it's something like that, or Big Brother. And my daughter is at college in St. Louis, so, you know, my bio's had to change now because she's not at home anymore.
Let's not get into further detail. I'm worried. I'm getting worried. What is Built to Suck all about, which is the book? You quote in it that ad agency founder, guru, veteran Jay Chiat said, let's see how long it is before we suck. And you basically translate that to Big Corp and the area of Big Corp as well, where you say that the era of size and scale making the big corporation is over. In fact, they've turned into being inhibitors, if I understand it right. And that conclusion seems to be supported by S&P 500 data, i.e., many of the companies that were there 100 years ago are no longer around, the majority, in fact. And the majority as well over the past couple of years have been not growing, let's say at a minimum, if not declining. And what you say is that they need to, what you call, embrace their heresy and need to rely on four pillars. And they are digital disruption, talent resurrection, customer obsession, and corporate citizenship. And I hope we'll get into all of them, at least to some extent. And if the company leaders embrace that and master those core skills, then they are on their way of not only survival, but thrival. Do you lay claim to that word? Is it in the Webster already, or is that a real word, thrival?
No, I like to make up words and acronyms. In fact, as a consultant, I'm paid by the acronym. So, you know, survival to thrival rolls off the tongue.
I love it. So, Joseph, thank you for being here. Did you sail over on the HMS Beagle on the Long Island Sound?
Also known as the Metro North, but a different version of it. But yeah, it's great to have a self-appointed title. One thing I learned actually when I became a consultant, I would always sit in conferences and hear the speakers get introduced, and I was always just blown away by how accomplished they were and how incredible their background was, until I realized that most people write their own bios or have their PR department write them. So, you know, if it sounds impressive, well, I hope so, because I wrote it. So
why not be an admiral?
Why not?
Absolutely. So the HMS Beagle, though, has a deeper meaning to it. Can you explain it in a few words?
Of course. 200 years ago, the real HMS Beagle sailed to the Galapagos Islands carrying Charles Darwin. And it was on that voyage, the second voyage of the Beagle, that he formulated most of his thinking and theories on evolution. And, homage to Charles Darwin, because it was he that said, it is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one that is the most adaptable to change. So change is really part of, it's the common thread, right? Which is adapt or die, survival of the fittest.
So fittest is often being misinterpreted as strongest.
Or almost intelligent, right? It's not about beating someone over the head with facts. It's about, we've always spoken about hearts and minds.
Right.
So it's a good combination of both.
From His Majesty's Ship to Build to Suck. Now there also you make a reference, and I think it's Jim Collins' book, Build to Last, I think in 1997 or something like that. Is it as a critique to this book? Is it as an homage? How should we take it? Or is it simply jumping on the bandwagon and have people say, I've heard this title before?
If it was anything, it would be an homage. And Jim, in the book, was very clear to say that the tenets or traits of the visionary company were not carved in stone. That companies would only remain visionary companies or companies built to last if they followed these tenets. But so many of them ultimately have strayed from those tenets, which is why, rather than criticizing, when you look at a GE or you look at a Motorola or many of the companies that were listed in his initial shortlist, why in a way I don't feel like it's a contradiction, but more of a, so this is what comes next. Built to Last was a great book and remains a great book to this day. But the reality is that companies today, or the corporate empire or era, are not built to last. They're built to suck because, and as you said earlier, the very thing that helped them grow, which was size, scale, economies of scale, efficiencies of scale, global reach, networks, synergies, all of that is now, I would say, a growth inhibitor rather than a growth enabler.
Remind me to get back to that scale question in a second, but I want to go into the subtitle as well before we dive in further, and that reads, The Inevitable Demise of the Corporation and How to Save It. So first of all, is it really inevitable? And second, a question mark is at the end. That's why I try to save it. Does it mean nobody can save them, or you're not quite sure how to save them, or it's not sure that it's inevitable?
So, a lovely two-part question. The inevitable part comes from...
Is that a criticism?
No, it's a compliment. Okay. Of course.
I'm a bit sensitive.
Yeah. Well, you haven't disagreed with me yet. And in fact, if you did, that would make for a great conversation. Because, when I wrote my second book, Join the Conversation, I said conversation is between two or more sides, not two or more people. Because ultimately, what is the sound of one hand clapping? When everyone is just in agreement with one another, you never move the world or an idea further or forward. So inevitable. The backdrop for that part of it was a chart that I saw in my daughter's classroom, and it showed several years ago, and it showed 5,000 years of history and heritage. 5,000 years of civilizations: Ming, Ottoman, Roman, Byzantine, Egyptians, Nazi Germany. Every one of them rose and every one of them fell. And they were all, you could look at hubris and arrogance and delusion and megalomania. And I said, well, how and why is the corporate empire or civilization any different? We're still looking at this thing that is, let's say, 150 years old or young, give or take.
Right.
And we've seen more change in the past 10 or 15 years than in 150 years that preceded it. And it is clear that this empire is not adapting and evolving quick enough. So that's the inevitable part, which is when we think we can cheat time, it is almost a clear indicator that we will fail.
Right.
The question mark, and I'm glad that you caught it there, is the fact that this is not a fairy tale. There is not necessarily a happy ending. You can, as I said in the A&A presentation, if you gave marketers the goose that laid the golden egg, they would slaughter it and cook it on the grill. One-time use versus recurring revenue.
With some secret recipe spices.
11 herbs and spices, of course, and put it on
deep fried.
And put it on the dollar menu. So the thing is there a way forward? Yes. Will everyone win? No. Will some win? Absolutely. And I think the point I just wanted to make is that, unfortunately, corporations are their own worst enemy. And I think this is an important point. We are all smart. The people listening or watching this are smart. They're all unbelievably well educated and wise and tenured. But something happens when we walk into the corporation, as I put it, we get overcome with dumb. Smart people making dumb decisions and unable to break out or break through or tell me what you really think. And because of that inability in this corporate environment, in these conferences, in all of these meetings, we end up diluting and mitigating and coming out with a mediocre product and value proposition.
All right. Now, you say that they need to embrace their heresy is a first step kind of out of that. What does that mean?
So it means on one hand, your deepest, darkest fears. Practically, I came up with 10 heresies. I would say 2 things I'm proudest of in my career. One was writing Flip the Funnel and the whole concept of retention as the new acquisition. And the other one is this idea of heresy. So what if you fired yourself? Well, Andy Grove did and allowed Intel to undertake this incredible pivot, if you will. What if you slaughtered the cash cow or left money on the table? REI closing, as they will in the next few days on Black Friday for the fifth year in a row. Netflix, when they shipped their billionth DVD, they shut it down. What if you funded your competitor? What if you put yourself out of business? That's the ultimate heresy that actually says if you don't attempt to put yourself out of business, you can be damn sure someone else will. Okay.
So what's new versus Schumpeter's ideas, for example, of creative destruction?
So, creative destruction is of course, a great input and ingredient. And I didn't actually build on it too much and touch on it too much in the book. But, I think even the concept of creative destruction implies this, that there is a natural next step or some kind of continuum. And I think what's happening, and this is not an or, it's an and. I think what we're seeing is that there is a replacement and a displacement happening, where we're seeing certainly new companies rise and very quickly, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, and I'm going to say this intentionally because I know we'll discuss it, the WeWorks of the world, which I know we will discuss. But I think there's something more fundamental, which is we're seeing entire business models being disintermediated and undermined by technology.
But what if I say that's absolutely nothing new? Okay, the robber barons got replaced, then the oil barons got replaced, and it's the famous marketing myopia, right? The railway barons thought they're in the railway business, not the transport business, so they got taken over by the car manufacturers, and now the car manufacturers are getting taken over by Elon Musk and his rocket.
And his truck.
However, it seems that, for example, size and scale is still an incredible force, because you listed, Google and Airbnb and Facebook and you name it, and the famous network effects seem to be a key driver to them becoming monopolies within a very short time compared to before. So if anything, couldn't one say that scaling, being the first at scaling like crazy and making your platform as dominating as possible is even more important than it was 10 years ago in the good old CPG days?
There's so much involved in that statement and that question that my head is hurting, because I'm thinking how many different ways can I answer that? And, so let me just start off with this idea. Today we see the big five, right? We see the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, Microsoft, which is a great example of a company that was big, kind of faltered, has come back as well.
Apple too.
Yeah, exactly. Apple's the other one. So what's interesting is this: there are 4 horsemen of the corporate apocalypse, as I call it.
And Scott Galloway.
Yeah. What?
Calls it the 4 horsemen of
I was
the
going to say, is
Acropolis.
he one of the horsemen? He might be.
That also.
So size is one, right? The second one is age. And, what I said is the younger companies, right, the Googles and the Amazons of the world, they have a bit of a stay of execution, because not so much the inertia, but the stubbornness, the being set in one's ways, becoming rigid and crotchety and saying these are the way things have always been done. So it's a bit of a stay of execution. But even if we look at Facebook today, I say this a bit tongue-in-cheek and cynically when I'm giving a presentation. Well, people came up to me and they said, well, what about Google? What about Facebook? Do they suck? And my answer is, well, Facebook already sucks. But if they don't now, they will. And I think, one of the things just before this book published, Jeff Bezos called this all-hands meeting. And he said to his entire company, one day we will fail. One day we will go out of business. Your job is to delay that for as long as possible. And I thought to myself, well, if he could say that, is there a company on this planet that it wouldn't apply to? So going back to what you said, which is, of course, size and scale has value. No one said, it's a death sentence completely. But it's what we do with that power that makes a big difference, and that gets into, I think, these four growth pillars. That says, what do you do with this force? Is it a force for good or a force for evil? Being a little bit over dramatic or dramatizing it for a little bit, a little bit. But I think a lot is going to come down to how we use size. Do we use it to actually make a difference across the board to all our stakeholders, right? The business roundtable, saying that the purpose of a corporation is to serve all stakeholders. That, and some of the more recent thinking in my book and by others, I think is kind of pointing a new way forward, honestly.
All right, excellent. I think that's an excellent place to make a little break, and we'll get right back to the solutions part of this interview after the break.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we promised we would dig deeper into the book Built to Suck by Joseph Jaffe. I love this title, Built to Suck. Let me say it again. We would talk about the solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, and the solutions are, you're talking about 4 pillars. I start hearing a little South African accent in myself. This is the kind of this vibe coming in. The 4 pillars are, or the solutions are based on, I guess, the 4 pillars of digital disruption, talent resurrection, customer obsession, and corporate citizenship. So digital disruption, when I read that, I was like, yawn, who is not talking about digital disruption? Tell us, what is different about your perspective on digital disruption?
Well, I think so, and I love the preempting of a yawn. I think the problem is we're not delivering digital disruption right now.
So everyone's talking about it, nobody's doing it. It's like sex.
But it's even more pronounced and important, because what's happened is we've become so predictable and traditional and safe with digital. And the way that I almost liken it is, imagine if we actually went back in time and we were talking today about the dawn of e-commerce, or this new incredible thing called search, where consumers could pull versus us pushing at them. That is the kind of disruption that is needed and necessary. And it's more than that, right? It's disruption of expectations, of business models, of revenue streams. And I think because of the lack of that, what we've done is, a great example actually would be, and I'm not meaning to pick on them, I'm using it as an example, is Twitter. Twitter, and I wrote about this in many previous books, I said Twitter should be acquired by the United Nations, because Twitter is a public service or a public servant. When stuff goes bad, Twitter is unbelievable at connecting people and relaying important messages in real time.
But wouldn't that make Twitter smaller than what it can be or already is?
So this is the problem. The problem is all of these platforms, and that's why I said I don't mean to pick on them, they just become broadcast vehicles. And it's just about pushing. And when somebody says something, and I'm not talking about the president, right? I'm talking about a celebrity, or I'm talking about a hero, a sports star. They push out a message, and there's retweets and replies and comments, and none of them are actually responded to by that person. So it just becomes a one-way reach platform.
But a wonderful platform for
but what is it?
Value signaling for everyone.
Well, it's just advertising and it's just media, right?
But the one thing I saw in the book is that most of your recommendations in this area, but even in the area of talent, for example, is to actually for big company, for Big Corp to work with these smaller startups, to work with incubators, to work with platforms, etc.
Right. So
why is that the best solution?
Well, so in my previous company, which was called Evolution, you can see I definitely have evolution on the brain. The value prop there was, what if Kodak acquired Instagram? Might they have survived? What if Blockbuster had bought Netflix when they had the chance to? They turned Netflix down. So the idea of building a bridge between Madison Avenue and Mountain View, where is the growth coming from? Where is the disruption coming from? We know it's not coming from the corporation. It's coming from not just Silicon Valley, but Silicon Alley and Silicon Valley and everywhere around the world. And it is the entrepreneurial revolution, as I talk about it, that is creating this disruption. And it's funny because I'm sure you've heard the saying that there are no new ideas. Everything is just a derivative from something that came before. And I reject that. I go to Walt Disney, who said, if you can dream it, you can do it. And I know this is almost a cliche example I'm about to give you, but we all grew up where our parents told us, don't get into a car with a stranger. And today they call that UberX. And so when we see these paradigm shifts, things that we could never have conceived in our lifetime, and I'm not talking about space travel, time travel and teleportation. I'm talking about the fact that Uber, and it goes back to CPG, right? So many businesses still have their stock in trade in durables, in boxes, in overhead, in physical, tangible. And then you have these companies like Airbnb and Uber and so on and so forth, where we are the product, where their entire, equity system is IP.
What about a lot of these companies famously not making any money, and or famously not being that blessing to humanity, because actually most of the people employed by them are scraping by. Certainly what I understand from, for example, Professor Galloway that we indirectly mentioned earlier, the salaries that are being replaced when a Macy's closes down and these people theoretically move on to work in the warehouse at Amazon are terribly lower, and the people live in misery. And the same would apply for the drivers. Yeah, they're independent, but they also have lost health insurance versus being employed by a taxi company and so on and so on. Do you take that into account? Is it kind of a full accounting? And do you think it'll live through the next crisis? Like after the crisis, which is to come, we don't know when, but we know it will come. Are you sure you're going to stand by that statement that, the Ubers and the WeWorks and so on, they're the great ones, and the P&Gs and the GEs are the ones that suck?
Well, so first of all, we could probably spend the whole time just discussing that statement. Hubris doesn't discriminate. And because we're human beings, it's just it's collateral damage for being human. And so, I lived through the dot-com boom and bust, where Get Big Fast, Pets.com, Super Bowl commercials was the order of the day. So in a way, it's not the first time we're seeing this idea of let's get big fast and the rest will follow. Making money, who needs that? Why operate using business fundamentals? But on the flip side, remember the large corporation suffers from short-termitis, which is the third horseman, being a public company. The fact that companies are unable to think or act or plan long-term because of this groundhoggian, quarterly earnings vicious cycle as well. So let me bring up WeWork, right? WeWork, phenomenal idea, phenomenal business model, phenomenal company in terms of what it has brought to the table. But I will defend WeWork. I won't defend the management. I won't defend the hubris. They're getting what's coming to them based on how the company was run. But that shouldn't confuse us in terms of recognizing how they truly democratized real estate, and specifically for entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial revolution. So we see it is a red herring if we look at WeWork now as this false prophet, or Uber, when it was really badly run, as endemic of this is the way it works, or the fact that this approach doesn't work. There's one other point, and I said this a long time ago, and I'll say it again because that was your question, which is we may just find, just like millennials and Gen Zers have no interest whatsoever in being a lifer, working their entire lives for one company that doesn't appreciate them and lays them off, or at the end gives them the gold Rolex, and they have a beautiful retirement party. So it is a fool's errand to think that making a lot of money is now the be-all and end-all.
Right.
And that goes back to corporate citizenship.
The unicorn myth. Let's jump to the talent for, actually it is your number 2, so we're not even jumping.
Yeah.
And the millennials. And I mean, you have some prescriptions where you say, hey, everyone wants to be creative, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, you just need to unleash them, etc. Again, it seems maybe like your other message, like I can't say it often enough. It's not a new idea, just like the next one of consumer centricity and consumer's boss and consumer obsession, but it's just whether people actually act on it or not. My question is, having worked at and with a lot of these big corps, could it be that not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur? Not everyone wants to work hard every day and become a billionaire and these things, and that maybe there might be some stability and some value in the bedeviled middle management to some extent? Might it be maybe some of the discipline that some of these others are missing? So. Or do we have to assume, no, everyone wants to absolutely be creative, wants to be a Dali, and wants to be a serial entrepreneur?
You're absolutely right. I agree. Not everybody wants to quit their day job and, decimate their life.
Might it be that millennials do not want to have a new job every 18 months in a couple of years from now when they have 2 children in college and so on?
And again, to that point, it is a red herring or a misnomer to believe that millennials are so different to us. What actually happens is when they do get married and they do have kids and they do have a mortgage and they do have to save for college, they actually end up resembling something very familiar. So I agree on that front as well. What I do think and what I speak about is, in the talent resurrection piece, I'm talking about how do you harness the entrepreneur inside the company. Let's make that a little bit more practical and tactical. If somebody has an idea and that idea is implemented and that idea becomes really valuable, why not compensate them for it? As simple as that. When we look at Dell's Idea Storm or Starbucks, My Starbucks Idea, why not figure out a mechanism using digital disruption to harness the power of a suggestion box from employees and customers and then not compensate them? And while we're at it, I use the example all the time. The agency that came up with the M&M's characters should be receiving royalties and residuals for as long as the M&M's characters continue to be used. And so what we really aren't doing is figuring out how to compensate ingenuity.
So you say
and
they
creativity.
would be loyalized, they would stay, they would find it rewarding to execute on their ideas within the corporation.
They might. I mean, one of the things that I talk about is first of all, if you're, and of course you've read the book and you see where I say ban the employee. Let's stop calling them employees. Let's call them talent. Let's call them cast members like Disney does. Let's call them entrepreneurs, but let's not call them employees. Going back to what you said about punching in, punching out, yes, some will do it. Unfortunately, a lot of those people, their jobs themselves are being replaced by automation, but that's another rant for another day. But what I'm talking about is just figuring out a smarter way to connect the dots and create a mechanism that says the lifeblood of this company depends on treating people a little bit better than we have. You know, the example recently was Abigail Disney, one of the heiresses, obviously, to Disney, came out, criticized the chairman of Disney for his $160 million odd bonus package. And she worked out that he could have personally funded a 15% pay increase to every single employee in the theme parks in Disneyland, every single one of them, and still walked out with about $24 million in bonus.
But then again, we would be including in this talk already all the unicorns of this world, right? Because at Amazon or Facebook or Uber, the situation is not better. If there was an internal Gini index that shows the discrepancy between kind of the top 1% and the 99%, it would probably as bad, if not be as bad or worse than at GE or at Johnson & Johnson, wouldn't it?
You know, I just want to be very clear, which is this is not, in fact,
not about the four being geniuses.
And it's not about old is bad and new is good, and it's not about corporations are bad and startups are necessarily good. Startups that are actually the size, you know, in fact, I even talk about this warning. We're seeing small business, the rate of small businesses starting and startups is decreasing right now. That's a real problem, and it's a real concern. And one of the reasons is that these mega companies, the Amazons, are too big. You know, I actually, like, for the first time, I was listening to Elizabeth Warren talking, and you know, and inherently as an entrepreneur and a capitalist, and you know, and you know, this
monopolization goes
but she actually made
into
sense.
incredible areas. I also heard that today, compared to 20 years ago, youth in particular listens to less of a variety of music than it used to, because basically the algorithm keeps feeding back at you what you already like. So it actually, even though supposedly the choice now is endless, you can listen to any music, we actually listen to less variety of music today than we did 20 years ago.
But also, like, what you're alluding to is just inevitable cycles, right? And so what typically happens is we will always find, right, there's a Dollar Shave to Gillette, but then there's a Harry's to Dollar Shave, but then there's something else to Harry. So there's that part, but then there's also the rise of the curators, right? The rise of the intermediaries. That's why I believe so strongly in the power of entrepreneurial thinking. And I also, as you saw in the book, there is a clear difference, convergent versus divergent thinking, in terms of how corporate executives think and how they go from here to there, from problem to solution, and how entrepreneurs think. So when you look at, I mean, we've spoken a lot on talent resurrection. If we can just figure out a way to attract, harness, and retain talent, and bring in some of these tenants, but not to everyone, to your point, a company has a better chance of surviving.
Gotcha. Let's move on to customer obsession. I grew up at P&G. Consumer is boss was A.G. Lafley's famous, end of 90s obsession. What's different with this customer obsession versus the consumer is boss kind of obsession?
Because AG was wrong, you know, and the customer is right. Rule number one. Rule number two. C rule number one. And also, P&G said the customer is boss. The customer is in control. We are not in control. We are living in chaos right now. This world is chaotic. This is Armageddon, right? This could be the apocalypse as far as we're concerned. So consumers are really just trying to pay down the mortgage and connect with their kids who are staring at screens.
They're not boss.
And they're not in control.
Okay.
You know, something that I even wrote about in my second book, Enjoying the Conversation, was I said, how to engage marketing-weary consumers through the power of community dialogue and partnership. Meet them halfway, listen to them, learn from them, collaborate with them as well. So my point about customer obsession is, I think, again, we should strike the words customer service, customer experience, even customer centricity. First of all, we don't even understand them. Second of all, we're definitely not practicing them. And as I say in this book, you still don't get it, and I can prove it, which is at the end of the day, when you look at what percentage of your revenue comes from repeat, returning, recurring business, your customer, your loyalist, your fan, your advocate, and then what percentage of your marketing dollars or even your discretionary dollars you invest against them, until that chasm is crossed or overcome, we will continue to, as I say, a little provocatively, we love acquisition, which is really strangers and prostitutes, first-time buyers and switchers or competitive conquesting. So until we get that right, customer obsession will never ever be a reality. And of course, go back to Jeff Bezos in his very first letter to shareholders. He used the phrase customer obsession. So I don't take credit for that. And, going back to what you said earlier as well, none of these pillars should be new ideas to people. But I do believe that I've brought a really unique and provocative perspective or something new to the table, like this idea of, banning the word employee.
So clearly you disagree with Byron Sharp and being the category prototype, and Byron saying even Coca-Cola only has like 30% household penetration. So why focus on those who already drink it? Let's focus on the 66% that don't. You're saying stick with the people who love it and make them love it even more, and others will come.
I will say that I'm a very, very I'm very respectful to fellow authors and thought leaders and writers and professors, etc. And I love the dialogue. In that case, I've always disagreed respectfully with that statement. And you can actually prove it, how to use existing customers to gain new ones. When we look at all the marketing data that shows us how much more expensive it is to acquire a new customer than it costs to retain an existing one, and we look at the credibility and the lifetime value that comes from a referral, a credible referral, customer-driven referral. I mean, you go back to Edelman's Trust Barometer. So right. I just don't think we've done enough research as an industry to prove out right. the fact that we can truly grow our business from the inside out.
The critique would always be that if you just stick with the people who already use your product, you can't reach the other ones, and eventually they're going to die out. I know you talk about that in your book.
But remember, the key is use them to get to those others.
So it's those disciples and the word of mouth, etc., that plays an important role there as well.
And by the way, that gets into advocacy and word of mouth and influencer and all of the and social media and all of these wonderful little things.
Now we're running out of time, but I want to get to corporate citizenship, particularly since we're at the conference board, and there's a lot of work on corporate citizenship going on here. Again, it seems a word that's like a title that's often used. What is different about the type of corporate citizenship you're talking about versus maybe the typical one being discussed by Big Corp?
So I'm glad that you didn't give me another yawn there for
I wrote it down, but I
didn't give it. And I saw that in the notes initially, but you would be right with your yawn. That yawn would be well-timed, because it just annoys me to no end when you hear all this lip service paid.
Everyone's saving the world now.
And corporate social responsibility and purpose. That word purpose, it's like nails on a chalkboard to me. I say, don't discover. If you are attempting to discover your purpose, you're more far gone than you actually thought. Just rediscover it. Remember it. You forgot it. Go back to day one. Go back to humble. But there's another point as well, and a bigger point that has come out of this, which is capitalism needs to evolve. And it's not just me saying it. It's Professor Philip Kotler, one of my role models, mentors. I learned marketing from his textbooks. I've had the pleasure of sitting down with him and learning from him. Recently, it's Mark Bertolini, it's John Mackey from Whole Foods, it's Ray Dalio. Jamie Dimon came out recently. Conference, it's smart people are now coming out and realizing that they don't have to now be retired to actually say what they've always felt. And people are coming out and sticking together saying, we can actually do better. And, my first boss, his motto was have fun, make money. And I've updated that now to say, have fun, do good, make money. We can still make money, we can still make a lot of money, but we have to actually step up now and realize that we are global citizens, that we are corporate citizens, and the world, the planet, community needs us.
But then you need to be willing to lose money on that, right? Or at least to lose money versus what's legally possible.
But not necessarily.
Because the big critique is, Starbucks go on talking about racial equality or whatever, having a conversation. Cadbury chocolate, great campaign in Australia about the same thing. Of course, all the platforms. But why don't you just pay your taxes and then enable the states at least to do the few things like education, etc., that you say you support? What do you say to that? I mean, at the end of the day, don't you need to put your money where your mouth is?
Yes.
And I'm not even talking about investment. I'm even just talking about being a good tax citizen, like everyone else. Pay your dues.
I mean, yes. Again, this is not an either or; it's an and approach. Mm-hmm. It's bigger as well. Remember, I'm a marketer and I come from the marketing side. So one of the reasons I'm looking at corporate citizenship is recognizing that if companies, a concept that I came up with in the book called mirror and glass, companies are too opaque. They're like mirrors, reflections of beautiful images, called image advertising or positioning or branding, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. But today we live in a world of glass door. We live in a world where we see our food being cooked in front of us in restaurants. And until we become more glass-like and transparent, we're not going to win the talent resurrection or the customer obsession battles as well. But going back to this idea of responsibility, and again, I use them as an example in the book, but I certainly wasn't just attacking them. When a alcohol company or a beer company comes out and they say, drink responsibly, and it is a tiny print at the bottom of an ad, or they create one ad because that's their quota of CSR investment, it's a crock. Mm-hmm. So what I want to see is a beer company coming out with a heresy. This is a heresy saying, it was one of them, what if you turned your back on your customer? If you drink and drive, we don't want your money. We're firing you. Your money's no good to us. Or an example that I put in the book, which is, what if a beer company partnered with a beleaguered car company and they came out with a breathalyzer immobilizer that actually says, and because they just acquired a ride-sharing company, they'll now drive you home or take you home. That's what we need to do.
Mark Ritson would tell you there's probably only going to be less than 1% of companies that have a right to succeed, to be doing good, because they're private, because their founder doesn't care about the money. And we're usually talking about one company, which you're wearing, which is Patagonia, right?
Yeah.
And then we're struggling very, very hard to come up with a second one. And maybe we come up with a second one looking at the list of B Corps or whatever. Do you think this is a thing that corporation can self-impose on themselves, or does it need a little help of governments and citizens for that?
Citizens, yes. Government, less so. Hope springs eternal. So I'm hopeful that governments, and organizations that bring governments together can figure out better ways forward and middle grounds. And I think, and we might be getting closer to that when we see what's happening in the world and on this planet. But that's why, again, as a capitalist and as a marketer, as a businessman or business person, I came out and I spoke about corporate citizenship with a filter or a lens of differentiation and competitive advantage. And so the whole idea, when you said earlier, leaving money on the table, well, you didn't say that. You spoke about losing money. That's different to leaving money on the table. When REI says on Black Friday, get outside, opt outside, this year, the 5th year in a row, they're now combining it with don't just get outside, but actually do good.
No, it's a great marketing coup as well. Let's admit it,
and
because the original incept was their stores are not that filled up on Black Friday anyway, and so they said we might just as well close it and use it as a great coup, and it's very useful. So, okay, unfortunately, we don't have a lot more time. I just wanted to say that, well, first of all, I wanted to say we're talking about Built to Suck, and now I'm looking at the camera because we're filming this as well. You have a roadmap in there. It's a little chart. It's kind of like a business canvas to fill out and kind of inspire yourself, I guess, is the idea. Mm-hmm. And it uses the 4 pillars, here we go, to do that, which gives people an incentive to buy the book and look at that, I think. So with that, we have to run. Thanks a lot, Joseph, for the provocation. But before we run out of here, one question we ask everyone is like, what or who or which book inspires you, provokes you into thinking and thinking further along?
So this is going to sound like a I don't know what rating this podcast is, but I'm just going to use the word kiss ass. But I would say you inspire me, and I'll tell you why. Because it's these conversations that I love. It's you and everyone like you and the people I meet, and when I travel and speak, it's having conversations, and it's diversity of thought and opinion and conversations, really. Because you get me to think differently about even some of my own assumptions and challenge those assumptions. And I just think we need to do that more often. We need to have more of these kinds of conversations and debates that don't necessarily even need a rebuttal sometimes, but just food for thought that moves everything forward. So that's my honest answer.
Excellent. I thank you for that. And with that, I guess it's up to you listeners now to see what else can inspire you in our series of podcasts. Check them out. We have the off-the-shelf book discussions, but also many other podcasts, and you can find them at www.conference-board.org/podcast, just to make it super easy to find. I would say just Google Conference Board Podcast. And with that, thank you very much. Tschüss, auf Wiedersehen. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Admiral.
Pleasure to talk to you as well.
I don't know what the right formal.
I guess that was it. We just made it up now.
Excellent. Thank you.